Okay, Site 222, Unit 6, Part 6. I think this is probably the last piece to this lecture. So we're in the middle of talking about the statement that Waller makes that contexts that provide, that promote diffusion of responsibility, de-individuation, help to create a callous attitude towards killing, right? So let's talk a little bit about de-individuation. So de-individuation is a state where a person feels relatively anonymous, right? Where they feel like they're not going to be identified as a particular individual, they're part of a group. And so when a person de-individuates, they're more likely to do stuff that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise do, right? They're more likely to go along with what the group is doing. And sometimes that's not good stuff, right? As with this picture where they're beating up this guy. People tend to be more aggressive when they are in de-individuated conditions. So big groups, personal identity obscured. Sometimes they actually take steps to make sure their identity is obscured, as with the KKK there. We also know that groups who change their appearance before they go to war, thereby obscuring their identity, are more aggressive against their victims, against prisoners and stuff, than those that don't change their appearance. Right? So it's interesting that we do have this process of altering appearance for the people who go to war. It could be camouflage, it could be war paint. The very fact that people, wear uniforms and all look the same contributes to de-individuation, right? We don't see individuals here, we see a bunch of soldiers marching. We see them as a group. What about rational self-interest as a motivator? We tend to prefer more wealth, power, prestige, esteem than less, right? Most of us are motivated by these things. And if we believe a course of action will lead to the most positive outcome, then it becomes an attractive course of action, right? So, there are some factors to consider here. Professional self-interest. Sometimes the self-interest is about the incentives being offered through an organization: advancement, promotion, pride, esteem among colleagues, accumulation of honors. So that can motivate individuals to conform to group norms, right? So that they get the promotion, they get the raise, they get the award, they get the medal. There's also personal self-interest. Plenty of examples of people claiming power, property, goods in situations of extremity. In World War II, the Nazis absolutely looted Europe. And for example, took paintings off of walls in mansions, took gold, took money, took possessions of the people and the places that they annexed. And of course, they robbed the Jews. And there were individuals who all of a sudden could get an apartment, right? There was stuff for sale. There were jobs that were now open because the Jews had been kicked out. So there's personal self-interest. And people may seek to fulfill ego needs as well, feeling this need for status and power. And that might also contribute to decisions to aggress against others. Now, I don't want you to think, though, that this means perpetrators of violence suffer from low self-esteem. There's not a lot of evidence that that's the case. On the contrary, this is Roy Baumeister here, a social psychologist. He points out that violent acts follow from high self-esteem, not from low self-esteem. He's a personality psychologist as well. Violent acts follow from high self-esteem, not from low self-esteem. This is true across a broad spectrum of violence, from playground bullying to national tyranny, from domestic abuse to genocide, from warfare to murder and rape. Perpetrators of violence are typically people who think very highly of themselves, right? Bullies feel justified in their bullying. Tyrants feel justified in the tyranny that they perpetrate. So Baumeister suggested that it is threatened egotism that renders a person more likely to aggress. So this is where you think highly of yourself and somebody threatens that view of yourself. And so a common option there is to defend your ego by responding aggressively against the threat, right? He goes on to say that narcissism, which is a grandiose view of one's own superiority, an inflated sense of entitlement, low empathy towards others, that this is the specific form of self-regard most closely associated with violence. Narcissists have high ego needs. They need their egos fed all the time, people complimenting them all the time, and telling them that they're awesome. And they are heavily invested in thinking highly of themselves and in having others think the same way. And so if you threaten a narcissist's sense of self, they may well come at you aggressively. Okay. Those factors that create a momentum towards initiating, sustaining, and coping with evil behaviors that Waller was talking about, professional socialization, we've covered, group identification, we just kind of finished, and the third one is binding factors of the group. So these are the pressures that work to keep people within an organization or hierarchy, including ones that perpetrate evil. So some of these binding factors are conforming to peer pressure, right? So it's normative social influence. This is when we conform so that we will be liked and accepted, as opposed to ridiculed, rejected, punished, right? So with regard to Battalion 101, Christopher Browning suggests that non-conforming ultimately meant refusing one's share of the dirty work, and that meant you wouldn't be liked by your group anymore. And of course, these were your buddies. This was your family away from home. And it might lead to rejection and ostracism by these people, right? So normative social influence, kind of pushed people to do their share so that they maintained a good relationship with the others. Then there's informational social influence, using other people as a source of information. We have a need to know what's right in a given situation. And when it's ambiguous, when we're uncertain, we look to others and do what they do. So it's taking our cues from other people's actions in our group. Okay? So there's conformity to peer pressure. There's also kin recognition cues that can kick in. People help kin, right? Kin are your in-group, your family, the people who share genes with you, more than non-kin. And this is probably down to natural selection, that we are wired to sacrifice for those who share our genes. We're also evolutionarily primed to define kin as those people we're familiar with because we live with them. We rub shoulders with them all the time. We break bread with them. We spend our days with them. And so kin can come to mean, your brothers in arms in times of war, right? Genetically unrelated individuals can come to be understood as kin and be treated as such, so that you will sacrifice for your brothers in arms, for example. We also recognize kin by phenotypic matching, which means we will sacrifice more for those who look like us, right? And that, again, is an evolutionarily evolved tendency. And these cues can be manipulated. How are they manipulable? You can make people in the in-group all look the same. Give them the same haircut, give them the same uniform, make sure they have the same mannerisms and habits, tattoos, weaponry, etc. We can keep them in close proximity. So sharing living quarters, working shoulder to shoulder, right? And by using kin language like fatherland, motherland, brothers in arms, homeland, all of this refers to family. These are kinship terms, right? Mother Russia, Uncle Sam, he's a relative, right? It's also accomplished by making members of the out group look different from the in group and homogeneous to other out group members, right? So that the out group looks like this massive sort of sameness, which is palpably different from one's in group. So, the striped pajamas, the Star of David, these are ways to make the out group look different from the in group and make the out group look all the same. We also need to mention gender. Direct acts of violence in genocide and mass killing are overwhelmingly the work of men. So we need to think about norms for masculinity, right? What does it mean to be a man? Those norms tend to include toughness, strength, and courage, doing your duty, fulfilling your obligations, being honorable. And all of these norms for masculinity facilitate violence, right? Here's your chance. It's men we want. Be a real man, right? Join the military. When you look across cultures, homicide statistics reveal that men are overwhelmingly more likely to be killers than women are. Men and boys consistently score higher on social dominance measures. And women and girls are less likely than boys to prefer group-based social hierarchies and ideologies that foster group inequality. There's a big difference between the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, how they are set up, and sort of the values that they espouse. Now, some contemporary research argues that the reason we see more men committing violent acts is because women haven't been given the same opportunity to do so. So some argue that when given the chance, women can show the same level of brutality as male perpetrators. So is there evidence for this? Well, certainly Milgram's experiments showed that women share a similar proclivity for obedience to authority as men do, although more women defied the experimenter earlier on in the proceedings than men did. And there are certainly cases throughout history of women being militant in wartime, rising to heights of valor as well as sinking to depths of brutality. So it's not hard to find examples, right? This is the example of Lindy England that we talked about before, the Army Reserve soldier who served in the 372nd Military Police Company, one of 11 military personnel convicted in 2005 by Army court-martial in connection with torture and prisoner abuse at Abu Ghraib, right? She was a woman. Very few Holocaust survivors recall SS women being more lenient or soft compared to the men. So there were some women who worked in some of the prison camps, right? This is a mugshot of Bergen-Belsen Irma Grice, known for setting starved and savage dogs on inmates, using a bullwhip, sadism, torture, and arbitrary shootings. She doesn't seem to be having much trouble with being brutal, right? So Waller's view on gender is that we need to approach the perpetration of evil by women the same way we have with men, as ordinary people influenced by cultural, psychological, and social constructions. And we need to be aware of gender stereotypes that lead us to believe that women just don't do these things. But it's not just gender stereotypes that tell us women just don't do these things, at least not as much as men do. While it's clear that women are capable of brutality and violence, it's also true that men commit violent crimes in overwhelmingly higher numbers than women do. And I don't think that Waller adequately addresses the issue of gender here. So I just wanted to point that out, show you this chart, which is looking at the gender of offenders between 2011 and 12 in England and Wales. The darker line is male, the lighter line is female. Here's for fraud and forgery, theft and handling stolen goods, criminal damage, let's jump down, violence against the person, robbery, drug offenses, motoring offenses, burglary, sexual offenses, right? In all categories, more men than women are perpetrators. So I think the issue of gender is still a valuable and open issue for study. Okay, that brings us to the end of this unit.